Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Advisor. I am co-host of the show, Lisa Urbanski, and I am here with Mr. Bryan Wetzel. He has a show on our platform. He is talking about schooling, and all things to do with schools. So if you haven't checked out his episodes, you really need to. You can find it on our channel. So Bryan is the author of The Real Problems Destroying Education, which was published in March of 2024. And he is
Mhm.
showing up to talk to all of us about just that. And today we're going to be talking about a current event, and I'll let him have the floor in a second here about the Department of Education. But before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsors, Spreaker and iHeartRadio. Without you, this would not be possible. Welcome back, Bryan.
Thank you for having me back again.
Yeah, you're looking great. We talked about it, but you got the red shirt on. You're looking powerful and strong.
Yes. Well, it fits my mood today.
Nice,
Not that when I wear
nice.
black, I'm feeling depressed, but some days you're like, I want to stand out. So this is
Mm,
the shirt for it.
love that. I love that. Talk about standing out. The topic for today. So this is a current event that is going on with the
Yeah.
Department of Education. Now, let's just get into it. Can you talk about that? What's happening?
Well, right now the administration and a lot of activists who are for school choice and vouchers have been pushing to have the Department of Education shut down. This is getting very mixed reviews. Some people are for it, obviously, and some are very much against it. I think the notion, well, I know the unions are very against it, but that's partially too because they get money from the way the Department of Education is structured. And it also gives them somewhere to go and lobby to, which is one of the reasons a lot of people want it shut down, is that people go to lobby the Department of Education and they get things enacted that maybe the parents haven't agreed to or gotten to vote on or feel is a good policy. Um, and so it comes down to the question really when you could talk about the Department of Ed is if it shuts down, I get the feeling from some of the people I read on Twitter that or X that then education goes away, but that's not really the case. The Department of Education wasn't always around. Um, Really what the Department of Education at the federal level, their function is to take in tax dollars from all of the states and then redistribute it based on what they consider to be the needs. Um, that has been at times a good thing. It's been at times a bad thing. And, on occasions, particularly when some states were refusing to adapt Common Core, the Department of Education wouldn't give you your school funds because you were supposed to be adapting, their policies. Now they have said it wasn't a mandate, but if you're telling people you can't have your money, it may not be a mandate that you must do it, but you are definitely strangling a part of that state's education fund by not giving out the funds. Um, I think what proponents of shutting down the Department of Ed see as a better way to go is instead of your state sending the money to the Department of Education and having them take and not send it all back, but give some of it to different states, is that now your state gets to keep all of the money that it collects for education and it can use it however it wants to.
Right.
Um, if you're of a collectivist mindset where you think that money should be redistributed so that everyone is fair, then you probably like the Department of Education model. But I would point out that at times the Department of Ed has played politics with, like I said earlier, with giving out some of those funds where they would, selectively not give as much money or they would pool portions of the funds based on states not adhering to edicts that they had come up with. Um, One of the things I'm a proponent of dissolving it, or maybe at least making it much smaller, where it's more about managing policy that should or should not go on in schools, but staying out of the money part. And here's why I say that. So the Department of Ed, like every other federal agency, rolls to the right or to the left based on who's in office. And because of that, a lot of times you get these wild shifts in policies. So when Trump was in the first time, we had Betsy DeVos who moved everything farther to this way. And then when Biden came in, everything went back hard this way. And if you go back even farther under Obama, under Bush, it's constantly moving like this. It's almost like at an official once tell me in Texas that it's almost a moving target. As soon as a new administration comes in, they expect to get a whole new list of demands.
Right.
I think it'd be better if we just let the states, who the officials there are elected in most cases, not maybe not necessarily the people running education in your state, but at least the governor and the people who he's or the governor is appointing, they have at least an idea of what the people in that state want or
Right.
um, what kind of and it's no secret if you're in New York or California or on the West Coast in particular, things are more progressive. Things are a little
Hmm.
more conservative towards the middle of the. Well, when you have the federal agency being more progressive, that means they want to force everyone in the middle of the country to be more progressive with them, and vice versa. California doesn't like it when, in the first Trump administration or Bush, when they made edicts that they wanted California to follow, because
Right.
that's not how they roll. I think it would be better to just let the states take their money and use it how they feel best, and if they don't use it in a good way, then those people get voted out. Um, it's a little more difficult to push back against the federal agency than it is your state agency. Because let's face it, your governor you're going to be able to get to the governor's office a lot faster than you're going to be able to get to the president or even the Department of Education. The other part of that too is that as they begin stripping down some of this stuff, it turns out that a lot of the people who were into the federal agency were also taking, uh, well, there's a lot of lobbyists in Washington, and it's not just the Department of Ed, but there's a lot of lobbying that goes on with the Department of Ed as well. One of the things
Mm.
that I've seen that I think is a positive change is that several states, due to the MAHA movement, which is for a healthier, and I have a whole thing in the book about the fact that the food we're feeding our kids in school is not conformative to producing kids who are attentive. There's too much sugar in it. There's too many carbs. That means they're getting tired after they
Mhm.
have lunch. There are a lot of
So I'm
studies
just going to
about
interrupt you
when,
for quickly and
sure.
ask, is this part of the spending money that would be a good way to utilize the funds? Because when you're talking about, using funds in a positive way, how do you measure that? Like, would be providing schools with better nutritional options be, part of utilizing funds in a positive way, or what types of things do you measure? How would you measure that?
Well, I think that it's all subjective. I I'm a
Okay, that's fair.
minimalist. I think that we shouldn't be spending money on things that are frivolous or fringe ideas. I would prefer that, as we talked about in the previous one, that we stick to the basics, math, English, language arts, history, science. Those are the basic things. And that's another area where the Department of Ed has gotten into some messiness with different states where they're pushing for social issues to be taught,
Mhm.
and the parents in those states are not happy with that, but there's no one to fight back against because it's not up to the governor or anybody local.
Right.
Um, and so
So you
I
were
feel like
talking,
the, go ahead.
you were talking about the Maha movement, right?
Well,
Can
what
you
I was
explain
pointing
what
out
that
was
is?
that, yeah, so that's the Make America Healthy, again, that Robert F. Kennedy's movement started, but it has a lot of really good doctors and medical researchers on board with it. There's a lot of nutritionists that have really gotten on board. And I've
Mm,
started, I think there's 4 states now, and there's hopefully going to be a lot more that they're literally changing their lunchroom foods to be more healthy, to have more protein, less carbs, less sugar. One of the things that goes on, I'm going to come back to the Department of Ed, but I'll tell you this. One of the things that I thought was sad that I learned about public education is that a lot of times the kids who go to, let's say it's an elementary school, well, at the end of the lunch line, they have like muffins, ice cream, candy. They have all these things that are unhealthy, and the parents don't get to say they're not allowed to buy that. It's up to the child. So the child may get his or her lunch, and go sit down and only eat the candy and the muffins
mhm.
and the things that aren't good for them. And I've spoken to teachers who say they will tell their administrators, hey, I have a parent complaining that their child is only eating the bad stuff. And they say, well, but that's how we make extra money. Okay, so we're
What?
making extra money on the child eating candy and ice cream. That's counter to what I would think that a school would choose. So I'm happy about that. But if you have a federal Department of Education and they start limiting money for what you can use it for, you might not see these changes because now a
Mhm.
state, and I think Texas is one of the states that decided to um, increase the health of their lunchroom food. Let's say they get their funds from the Department of Ed, and the Department of Ed says you must spend it on these things. And at the end of it, the discretionary is what it would require to change over the food. Because let's face it, like my wife and I try and eat organic, but guess what? It's a lot more expensive than the
Way
crummy
more.
food. And that goes the same with a school. If a school wants to upgrade their lunch to healthier food, it's going to cost a little more money. Now, how they do that, I guess that's really up to them. Are they going to charge more to the parents? I mean, a lot of parents aren't even paying for lunch, to be honest, because they get free and reduced lunch. But if you have a Department of Ed, what we're illustrating here is that there's limited options at the state level to do some things because your requirements are coming down from the top. Whereas at the state level, if you get rid of the Department of Ed, those states can choose what's best for them. And I'm always for freedom of choice. I don't think that people in Oregon want to do what people in Florida are voting for, and we know that people in California don't want to do what, people in, say, Wisconsin are voting for. It's just
Yeah,
different.
because
And
each
I think
place
that
is
we
so
should let them
different.
do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so why try and make a one size fits all group of rules and apply it to everybody? Now, we
Mm,
can agree on a few things. Racism, we want everybody to be treated equal. Those are some broad things that we would love to have applied across the board. But when it comes to a lot of other things, particularly social issues, there's no agreement across the country from state to state. It's just not. And so I don't think it's a good idea having a federal agency mandate stuff that a state doesn't really want to be on board with. And by the
right.
way, a governor has a lot closer, they're so much closer to their voting population than, say, the Washington, D.C. is. And so I have heard politicians local here in Georgia talk about how they will sometimes get people get on their case about stuff that's coming down from the federal government as if it was made at the state level. So let's just take that away and let the states do what the state wants to do. That's my
Hmm.
position
Hmm.
on it. What is your thoughts?
Interesting. Well, I'm curious to know what you think would happen if the Department of Education was shut down. Like what would happen?
Really nothing. It would just the states wouldn't send the money to the federal government. They would hold on to those tax dollars and use them for themselves. And some of the bigger states like Texas and California are the ones that actually get a little more screwed over on this. It's funny that some of the politicians in California are not for it. But because they have such a large population, their tax dollars are some of the ones that get cut up and divided and sent to smaller states that, let's say, like Mississippi has a much smaller population. So in order to get enough money for schools in Mississippi, they have to take money from some of the bigger states. And that brings up an
Interesting.
issue. What does Mississippi do? Um, I don't really have an answer for that, but
Hmm.
I'm sure that there's a way of mitigating some of that stuff. And I feel like you have a smaller population, your expenses should also be lower.
Hmm.
Um,
You would think,
but
right?
I don't get to do their budgets. So, and by the way, most states, about 25% of the state budget, some states it's 30, is all for education. Like I
Mm,
always hear people say, well, they don't spend enough. Well, I know we spend a 25, we're spending a quarter to a third of all tax dollars in most states are going to education.
right.
I think it just needs to be used more wisely. I've said that on every single time we've gotten together and discussed this.
Yeah.
There's just they're not spending it very wisely, and I think that I almost think that a Doge type of thing, getting into some of the states and just saying, "Hey, where is all the money going?" and let's restructure how this is done would probably be beneficial in
Yeah.
in a lot of places.
I agree with you. Like kind of starting from scratch, seeing where everything's going, seeing the impact
Mhm.
and then figuring out how to use it better.
By the way, I will point this out. This is important. Some people will discount this, but I said earlier the Department of Ed hasn't been around forever. It's only been around, I think, 35 years. I have to look that up. It's been a while. It may have been 40. But education scores were better before then. Now, I don't think that the Department of Ed at the federal government level is the reason necessarily. But there's been a lot of tinkering with education throughout the years, and this is one of the changes that doesn't seem to have made a positive impact unless you're measuring it by social justice issues or um, I don't really know what it is. I have tried to I've looked at both sides of this argument, and I don't really see that education in most states will change much at all if they close it. It'll just,
Well,
instead of sending the money and having them send it back, it'll just stay at the state.
right. And your wife is a teacher, right? So do you guys chat about this
She
stuff? What
is,
does she think?
she's all for it.
Okay.
She doesn't like for me to bring her into it too much because, that gets a little tricky. You might get some people upset with her, but she's a great teacher. Um, I think that with her and her colleagues, some of the things that I write about in the book with respect to changing curriculum and some of the behavioral stuff, those things mean more to them than something at the Department of Ed. Now, I will say this, um, all of them that I know of are on board with having better, more nutritious school lunches. And there's I think four really good studies long term about the fact that when kids eat carbs and sugar for about an hour, hour and a half afterwards, your ability to remember what you're learning drops
Hmm.
significantly because your glucose level spikes and your brain is going, everything is working at double time, and then you get tired. And
Yes.
so it would be better if we just try and avoid those things. It's funny too, because I just happened to mention this once to an administrator, and he looked at me like I was nuts. And I said, well, school's about educating. I want the teachers working hard to educate them. And if you're giving them stuff that limits their ability to learn, doesn't that seem counterproductive? And he didn't really have an
Counterproductive. Yeah.
answer.
Wow. Yeah, your
I think
stomach
it's
is
just
like
one
your
of those things that's
second brain.
always been, and they just don't think about it outside of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Almost like there needs to be a fresh perspective, a modernized way of
Hmm.
kind of controlling this, utilizing money the modern way, because we know so much more about these things now than we used to, right? We know that what we put in our body is directly impacting our brains and
Yeah,
how we learn. And
absolutely.
to teach kids that at a young
Yeah.
age, like I would have loved to have been taught that stuff. It would have
Well,
benefited
what's
me
funny
so
about
much.
that always cracks me up. I think I even wrote about this in the book, but then I took it out. But it makes me laugh because most of these kids go to health class where they're taught how to eat healthy, and then they go
Mm,
to lunch, and it's nothing like what they were told is the best
hmm.
food to eat
Eat the rainbow. I
to
remember being told to eat the rainbow in health class.
right, right, right. Well, sadly now too, we learned that's come out in the past couple years that the food pyramid was paid for by several food companies.
Mm,
I didn't know
interesting.
that for all our life. We heard about the food pyramid, but as it turns out, you should flip it upside down. That's the more healthy way to
Mm,
eat.
interesting. Is that the fruit and
Yeah.
vegetables first? Is that what that means?
Yeah. You really meat, fruits, vegetables, things that's how my wife and I eat. We eat what we call farm to table. So in other words,
Hmm.
if it grows from the ground or on a tree and something that's living eats it, we can have those. But if it has to go through two or three processes to get on my plate, probably not a good thing.
Yeah. And we need to teach our kids that. I love what you're saying there. That makes so much
We
sense.
do. I always tell you too, you teach them. I always say this to people. They say, well, my kids don't listen. You know what? My kids are in their 20s, except for one of them. And I will hear them talking to me. And like my daughter has a 2.5 year old. She's repeating things that I used to say to her. She doesn't even know
Mm,
it. And
yeah.
it'll make me laugh. So I always tell people they're
It's like
listening.
parroting. Yeah.
It's soaking in. You just have to say it a lot because maybe only 3% each time gets in. This
Yeah.
means you got to keep saying it and saying it. But I'm starting to hear them repeat some of my mantras back to me. And
Hmm.
that makes me happy
Hmm.
because it
Yeah.
means that I didn't waste my time all those years.
Yeah. And how powerful would it be for the schools to, have such a positive impact? And, a lot of the things you talk about in your book and just changing the school system would be so, so impactful for our kids. Do you want to talk about your book? Let's talk about your book. What does your book cover?
Okay.
Just give everyone like a quick overview. Where do they find it? What does it cover? What are people going to learn when they read your book?
Well, the book is on all the major bookstores from Amazon to Barnes and Noble, Apple, iBooks. You can get it in audiobook, print, or ebook. If you're on Spotify as a premium member, you can listen to it on the Find Away Voices. The book is, as I've told in the past, I had started with some other friends and investors. We had started a company that made educational resources, and during all that time of meeting with probably over 1,000 teachers, doing many speeches and meeting with principals and district administrators, a lot of the stuff I heard and learned just really bothered me in a way. It was alarming in some cases, and in other times, I always tell people this. This is how you can sort of know how this went down. I thought when I got involved in education that some of the weird decisions that I would see or criticize that would make sense. You got to peek behind the curtain. You go, oh, I see. That makes total sense. But
Right.
actually, it made less. And I just thought like some of this stuff doesn't make any sense. And when you would talk to the teachers, to the school administrator, to the district administrators, nobody seemed to be in sync with why these decisions were being made. Everyone had their own little, you know, tribe of people who made this decision, and then these people have to follow it, and these people down here are unhappy because they're following stuff that the people who made the decision didn't have any real experience to make. And I saw a lot of teachers quitting. Right now, there's a tremendous need for teachers around the country. It, it's a job that if you stay in it, it doesn't pay great in the beginning, but as you step up each year or every other year in some states, you can pretty good pay. You get your summers off. If you're a woman and you have children, you can take them to school with you and bring them home. So it's ideal for
Mm,
that. But a lot of them are ditching it because it's just so stressful, and they don't understand a lot of the decisions that are being made have affected their career negatively. And I just couldn't believe it. So I started writing some notes about different things. So the book goes through whether more money in education would help. And I have statistics there. And I have research from Stanford University and Harvard. In there, I have the economics of failing schools and schools that are doing well. I have it broken into chapters on educators, parents, students, administrators. Then we go into politicians and how they affect schools. Um, I have the chapter on the unions. Then there's a chapter on homework, vouchers, and school choice. And I go into private schools and charter schools. A lot of people wanted me to break this book into three parts, but I don't. But writing a book is hard. I didn't want to have to
yeah.
do that many times. We go into homeschool. I talk about different curriculums that are available under one
Mm,
chapter because there's a lot of people don't even know what curriculum is or how it's based, but most
mhm,
curriculum is very similar. The only thing that differs is when you're going to teach something. So maybe one curriculum teaches dividing fractions in fifth grade, maybe one curriculum teaches in fourth, one teaches in sixth. And so, there are differences, and there are a lot of the people that I cite in here had reasons why different curriculums fail, and some do better than others.
mhm.
Then I go into social and emotional learning, which is really big in schools right now. And I had a lot of really emotional, and the teachers that I interviewed who were retiring, that was one of the ones that really got their ire up. Um,
Okay.
and then I have a section in here on racism. And then I have the last chapter, instead of just having grievances for a solid book, I have solutions that I got from people who are retiring from education,
Mm,
a couple of um, professors, and then some of the stuff that I just know from having my own businesses that I wrote in that I think would be beneficial. And I think we talked last time, why not have a teacher board of advisors
mm,
and, you know, let the te when the if you're a CEO of a major company, you have a lot of power, but you can't just do anything you want and spend anything you want. You have to get the board to approve those things, and the board
mhm,
can remove you. Why can't we do it that way with education? Why can't you have
mhm,
teachers who are the ones in the classroom implementing these policies get together? You don't have to have all the teachers. You pick representatives from each school in your district. Have them say, these aren't working. I
mhm,
don't like this, and I know why this isn't going to work. One of the funny things, and they're not because they're what do you call it, prognosticators or whatever. Every time something was changing in education and I would start an interview, it was going to say take effect the following year. Every time I would talk to a teacher, they'd go, well, it's going to happen. And every time they were right because they're at the ground level working with the students, and then they get the
right.
parents' complaints. and they know how it's going to go when they bring it to administration. Why aren't
Yeah,
we
they're the
just listening
frontline
to them to
workers.
begin with?
Right.
Let's just listen to them to begin with. I
So you
think that
cover
that would
all
make
of
a
these
lot of sense.
topics, right? You cover all of these
It's a
topics
long
and
book.
more in your book.
It,
Wow, what a
it's a
wealth
long
of
book.
information.
Yeah,
That's
it's a long book.
amazing.
But like I said, I didn't
Amazing.
want to break it into three parts. I wanted it all to be there so that you're sort of taking the journey from how we started out and how we arrived at the end.
I love that. So why don't you leave? We're running out of time here, and I want you
Mhm.
to leave our viewers and our listeners with one really strong thing from today's episode. What would you like to translate? What would you like people to know? What does Bryan Wetzel want to leave everybody with today?
Well, I've left you with this before, but we'll expand on this a little bit. But one of the things is that there's a lot of great research about staying involved with your child's education. As I said before, don't wait until you find out there's problems to get involved because now you're playing from behind. Just stay up to date. If you knew how many times I hear a teacher tell me that they have students that the parents don't even go through their work that's in their folder for an entire school year, that's
Mhm,
sad. And there's a lot of benefit to doing it. You can ask your child, why did you get a low grade on this? Why did you do poorly on this? You
mhm,
might find out something that you need to take care of that you can address now while it's early. It's a lot harder to fix, for particularly when you're talking about, say, uh, what do you call learning disabilities? It's a lot easier to deal with those early on than it is to try as they get older.
mhm.
Um, so you want to stay involved. Find out what the teacher is saying. And the second thing I would I want everyone to know is that your teacher is not picking on your child. Let's dispel that right away. There's too much paperwork involved in having to do discipline these days. And most teachers are really not picking on, if your child is being picked on, I'm just going to say it, you need to take a look at what's going on with
Mhm.
your child. Maybe they're acting out for a reason, but to just point out that my child says they didn't do it, that drives teachers crazy because,
Mm.
they're in
Yeah,
the class with them all day and they wouldn't be sending home a note about something if it wasn't important. They just wouldn't.
impactful. Hmm.
And so that's another reason I tell people is stay involved with what's going on at school and don't always believe your child. I don't know how we got to this point where parents believe the child over the adult, but when I was a kid, if I came home with and I did more than once, note from the teacher, I got asked, what did I do? And if I always said I didn't do it. But my
Of
parents
course.
they were onto that. They would say, "So she's just picking on you?" And yeah, they didn't
Hmm.
believe me. And so
Hmm.
I would have to defend why I got in trouble. And I got spanked. I got paddled once in middle school. And I got in trouble for talking back to the teacher and then talking over her. So the vice principal sent a note home to my parents asking for permission to spank me the next day. I got in
Oh,
trouble at
wow.
home and then they signed off on it. So I got spanked at school. They don't do that anymore, but you know what? I shut my mouth for a long
No doubt.
time.
Yes.
And, I'm not going to get into whether we should be spanking again. We probably shouldn't. That gets too into some areas where we probably don't want to get into with strangers spanking your child. But I do think that behavior in the schools, every single teacher I spoke to, I mean, all of them, 100%, who have been teaching more than 10 or 15 years, have said that it has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And as we spoke on the last, if there's a way to fix that, you could solve a lot of problems in education. And I
Yeah.
think it's just
So,
a matter of dealing with it. Like every teacher and administrator has leverage on the child to get them to
Mhm.
behave, but I don't think we're using it anymore. We've gotten into a society where we feel um, like we have to coddle too much. There's a
Mhm.
great book by Jonathan, is it Jonathan Hyatt? Called The Coddling of the American Mind, and it's he's a professor at a college, and he chronicles how kids coming into college are not as mentally strong anymore. They can't take as much criticism. They get hurt faster emotionally. And, you know, I think it all starts at the elementary, middle, and high school level.
Yeah, I like that. So I think the number one tip I'm hearing from you is just like we need to pay more attention. We need to understand that things just don't happen for no reason. If there's issues, the
Right.
teacher's going to know about it. They're going to try and, you know, send that home to the parent to ask them to,
Right.
you know, pay attention. Um, and you're such a wealth of information. That's all the time we have for today. But I really am excited to bring you back on because our listeners are going to want to hear what you have to say next time.
I can't wait. I got a whole
Awesome.
list.
Amazing. Yes, you're such a wealth of information. And yeah, we can get into the next time, you know, about how involved, you know, parents really should be and the impact of that on kids in
Mhm.
the system. I know we were going to talk about that, but it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
Awesome. I'm Lisa Urbanski with The Advisor. Thanks for tuning in and make sure you come back to listen to more of what Bryan has to say about the school system. Bye for now.